Hello Internet, it's Matt here for the Dork Lords. If you're new to the channel, welcome. We talk about all manner of dorkly things here, so whether it's sci-fi, fantasy, superheroes, we probably have a playlist about it. Feel free to check us out. Today is another in our Dork Lord of the Rings segments. And today's topic actually comes to us from T-Heevelmouse. I hope I'm saying that correctly. T-Heevelmouse. If so, I think it's a great name, so good on you, T-Heevelmouse. T-Heevelmouse wants to know about Morgoth, the ultimate bad guy in Tolkien's mythology. And so that's what today's video is going to be about. Although there is so much to say about Morgoth that I'm going to have to do this in multiple videos. So we're going to take this chronologically, and we're going to do part one today. Morgoth is actually not his original name. His original name is Melkor, which means mighty arising. He is later given the name Morgoth, actually in the events that will take place after this video. So in the next video, he'll be called Morgoth, and that name means Dark Tyrant. That is just one of the many, many names that this individual has. You know, when you've got like a ton of nicknames, you know you're probably pretty important. When most of those nicknames have the word dark in them, you're probably important for the wrong reasons. But here's a little sampling. It is not all-inclusive, but here's a sampling of the many nicknames given to Melkor/Morgoth. Dark Lord, Dark King of Angband, the Dark Hunter, the Great Enemy, Master of Lies, Bauglir the Constrainer, the Black Hand, Belegirth the Great Death, and he called himself King of the World. He actually did call himself King of the World. So, you know, he wasn't particularly narcissistic at all. Interestingly, Melkor is the first and most powerful spirit that Eru/Iluvatar creates. Iluvatar, otherwise known as Eru, is Tolkien's version of God, right? He's the all-powerful being, and in creating the various members of the Valar, the first one he creates, Melkor. And as I say, the most powerful. So the way that Eru and the rest of the Valar start, creating the creation myth that Tolkien uses employs music, and so there are these themes that Iluvatar introduces, and his chorus of the Valar sing, and these songs weave and create essentially what becomes Middle-earth eventually, but Arda. And so it's Melkor in this chorus. You can imagine the chorus setting up on a series of risers or something. He's the jerk of the group who's constantly entering in like opposing chords, discordant sounds. In fact, kind of just, brings a lot of the songs to a halt, causing a lot of disruption. And at one point, even Iluvatar actually just like, I'm imagining he has a piano. He doesn't have a piano. But imagine that one chord on the piano, there's like a big chord that just silences everything. Clang! Cha! And Iluvatar basically scolds Melkor and says, all of your attempts at creating these discordant notes is all part of my plan. So this song, all of the things that you're doing to try to oppose me are just... you're just accentuating what I created. So you're not creating anything new. You're just doing as I assumed you would. And so that doesn't go over well with Melkor. I mean, he's, he holds it inside, but he's shamed by this being. He wants to be able to also to have the powers of Iluvatar. He wants to be able to create life, for instance. And it's a constant obsession with his throughout time. But in any case, so he's been properly scolded at that point. It is now time for the Valar to journey to Arda, which is still being created. They're still working on it, but it's a work in progress. And even though he's a jerk and everybody knows he's probably going to do horrible things, Melkor is allowed to join in with the Valar on Arda. Now immediately he starts calling himself the Master of Arda, and kind of throwing his weight around. His brother, Manve, who's kind of basically like the Lord of the Valar, immediately sees like, oh, my brother's going to be trouble. And so basically starts to try to push him out. And in that, his wife, Varda, joins in. Varda, as it turns out, she has the light of Iluvatar in her. She's more or less the queen of the Valar, if you want to call her that. So she would be the sister-in-law of Melkor, the wife of Melkor's brother. Melkor hates her, and he actually fears her more than any other of the Valar. And maybe that's because she has this light of Iluvatar in her. You know, it's kind of the light versus dark thing, perhaps. Interestingly, a little side note, Aloran, the Maiar spirit, who later becomes Gandalf, is actually affiliated with Varda. So that kind of makes sense, I think, perhaps. You know, there's a little through line there. An agent of Varda eventually helps to take down an agent of Morgoth, of sorts, you know, with Sauron. But okay, so Melkor is kind of pushed out to like a remote region on outer Arda, and for a long time, all is well. The end. No, okay. So there's peace, and the Valar are creating Arda. They're in the middle of their creation when suddenly Melkor returns. And he returns quite angrily, and he does what is called the Marring of Arda. So he comes and ruins a lot of the accomplishments that have been made by the Valar. And I'm going to read you a little quote here from the Silmarillion about Melkor's return, which is just full of this powerful fury. So here you go. Melkor's envy grew then the greater within him, and he also took visible form. But because of his mood and the malice that burned in him, that form was dark and terrible. And he descended upon Arda in power and majesty greater than any other of the Valar, as a mountain that wades in the sea and has its head above the clouds, and is clad in ice and crowned with smoke and fire. And the light of the eyes of Melkor was like a flame that withers with heat and pierces with a deadly cold. You're like, oh, okay. So he comes in, destroys a lot, which again is a kind of a constant theme. He shows up, destroys a lot of stuff. They chase him away, thwart him in some way. Everything's okay for a while. He comes back, destroys everything, chase him away. Like, Any case, what comes to the rescue in this situation is the champion of the Valar, Tulkas. Tulkas is this, as I say, he's the champion of the Valar. He uses no weapons, but he's basically impossible to defeat in a one-on-one combat. His presence scares away Melkor. Melkor, actually, one of his little idiosyncrasies is he's the only Valar that has a fear of death. There's a little bit of like a little human emotion in there. But he fears Tulkas, hates him almost as much as he hates Varda. But who doesn't Melkor hate? Let's face it. But in any case, Tulkas chases him away. And so, once again, he now, the Marring of Arda has occurred. It's what they called the First War. But the First War is won when Tulkas shows up, chases Melkor away. So flash forward to the completion of Arda. The Valar, without Melkor interfering, finally create everything that they intend to, and Arda is complete. And as a celebration of that completion, there's a big feast. It's also a feast in honor of Tulkas getting married to Nessa. And so there's a big wedding, and look, we created this world, let's have a big feast. So they do, and it is after that feast that Tulkas takes a nap, goes to sleep. And at this point, it is Melkor's spies, probably one of them, Sauron, who notify him that, hey, Tulkas is asleep, now's your chance. And so Melkor sneaks back into Arda while Tulkas is asleep. Just as a point of reference, I believe that Melkor probably gained the attention of Sauron in that first war. And that when he showed up and then was chased away by Tulkas during that time is probably when he made a good impression on his one day to become first lieutenant Sauron. But in this case, he's using his spies to tell him Tulkas is asleep. He's not being vigilant and guarding the borders. Let's sneak in. So Melkor sneaks in, goes underground essentially, and secretly builds a fortress. I'm going to read you another passage from the Silmarillion about that event. That stronghold was named Autumno. And though the Valar knew naught of it as yet, nonetheless the evil of Melkor and the blight of his hatred flowed out thence, and the spring of Arda was marred. Spring of Arda is what they called this time once Arda was completed. It's like, oh look, it's the springtime, everything's great. As soon as Melkor shows up and starts building underneath the surface, things start to corrode. Green things fell sick and rotted, and rivers were choked with weeds and slime, and fens were made, rank and poisonous, the breeding place of flies, and forests grew dark and perilous, the haunts of fear, and beasts became monsters of horn and ivory, and dyed the earth with blood. Then the Valar knew indeed that Melkor was at work again. Like, oh God, what's happening, Melkor? And they sought for his hiding place. But Melkor came forth suddenly to war and struck the first blow, ere the Valar were prepared. And he assailed the lights of Iluin and Ormal, and cast down their pillars and broke their lamps. In the overthrow of the mighty pillars, lands were broken and seas arose in tumult. And when the lamps were spilled, destroying flame was poured out over the earth. And the shape of Arda and the symmetry of its waters and its lands was marred in that time, so that the first designs of the Valar were never after restored. So that passage is referring to the lamps, Iluin and Ormal. These were these two great lamps that were used to light Arda. It was the light source. I've done a video on it. You can check that out. But yeah, they're very, very important lamps. And Melkor destroys them. And the destruction of those lamps destroys the world. You know, seas to rise and earthquakes to happen. And there's a new continent formed. And that's where the Valar eventually escape to. They go to Aman, create a new place where they can kind of hide away from Melkor. Melkor is on Middle-earth, and the Valar are over on Aman, this island continent. Because, once again, Melkor escapes. The lamps are destroyed. The Valar combined their might and push back Melkor again. He retreats. They can't really follow him because they're trying to keep the world from falling apart, essentially. So they're using their powers to try to reduce the amount of damage this cataclysm is causing. And in so doing, they don't have enough resources to deal with Melkor. So he has escaped again. As I say, he ends up on, basically Middle-earth. The Valar retreat to Aman. They create this giant mountain range. It's the tallest mountains ever. It's the Pelori. As basically a wall, a fence around their yard. Don't come in here, you. And so they are hidden away and protected from Melkor, but are also hiding from him, right? They're in isolation. This leaves Melkor somewhat unopposed for a long period of time on Middle-earth. And this is still prior to any of the elves and humans and such. We're still way before the First Age. The time of the lamps is over, but now we are in the years of the trees. So to light their new land in Aman, they don't have lamps anymore. The Valar plant these two trees, Laurelin and Telperion. I've got a video about that as well. But these trees light their land. But for the rest of the world, there's a lot of everything's kind of in shadow and darkness. The Valar end up putting up stars in the sky to try to, light the way. But in any case, it's a tough time out there on Middle Earth, unprotected by the Valar. Melkor is now, got his dungeons going. He's creating all kinds of monstrosities, including Mr. Balrog over here. This is where Balrogs start to come about. He also creates a new fortress, Angband, to go along with Autumno, and he puts his chief lieutenant, Sauron, in charge of Angband. So one of the few Valar to journey to Middle-earth from Aman is Orome the Huntsman. And he begins hunting these various monstrosities, probably not Balrogs, but anyway, the monstrosities of Melkor to try to keep them in check. And in order to thwart his efforts, Melkor creates a mountain range as an obstacle to Orome getting around. That mountain range becomes eventually the Misty Mountains. That's what we know in the Third Age as the Misty Mountains. That's where Moria is, Khazad-dûm. Moria is in a mountain range created by Melkor. I think it's kind of interesting. So, in any case, that was all just designed to slow down Orome from hunting down his creatures. Eventually, the children of Ilúvatar, the elves, awaken on Middle-earth. Melkor finds them and corrupts them. Basically teaches them fear. It is strongly implied, I think, at this point that he probably captures some of them, tortures them, and turns them into orcs. And so it's a bad time to be an elf, just waking up and going, oh, what? Oh, God, there's a horrible, the Dark Lord, the great enemy, whatever is attacking. So Orome also makes contact with the elves and realizes that they're afraid of him. The idea of fear is something he's like, what? Who taught you this? And he realizes, they're in for a bad time if we don't help them. Orome goes back to Aman, tells the Valar what's happening. The Valar agree, we gotta go save the elves. These are the children of Ilúvatar. We can't just leave them to be, done in by Melkor. So they begin the war for the sake of elves. Come over to Middle-earth, wage war on Melkor. Have a very convincing victory. Melkor is driven back to Autumno. And from there, I'm going to read you another passage here about how basically the siege of Autumno resolves itself. But at the last, the gates of Autumno were broken and the halls unroofed, and Melkor took refuge in the uttermost pit. Then Tulkas stood forth as champion of the Valar and wrestled with him and cast him upon his face. That's like he did a pile driver move on him. And he was bound with the chain Angaenor that Aule had wrought, so this magical chain, and led captive, and the world had peace for a long age. Nonetheless, the Valar did not discover all the mighty vaults and caverns hidden with deceit far under the fortresses of Angband and Autumno. Many evil things still lingered there, and others were dispersed and fled into the dark and roamed in the waste places of the world, awaiting a more evil hour. And Sauron they did not find. But when the battle was ended, the Valar drew Melkor back to Valinor, bound hand and foot and blindfolded, and he was brought to the Ring of Doom, where he lay upon his face before the feet of Manve, his brother, and sued for pardon. But his prayer was denied, and he was cast into prison in the fastness of Mandos, whence none can escape, neither Vala, nor elf, nor mortal man. There was Melkor doomed to abide for 3 ages long, before his cause should be tried anew, or he should plead again for pardon. So he was found guilty of destroying the earth and corrupting the children of Iluvatar and his enmity for the Valar. And so he was essentially imprisoned for thousands of years. It says 3 ages. Ages really don't have the same meaning as they are going to have later, because we're not even in the first age yet. This is in the years of the trees. So anyway, thousands of years are going to go by where he's in prison. They've got him exactly where they want him. He's powerless to do anything. Yay! I'm sure nothing could possibly go wrong at this point. Or can it? Find out in next week's video when we see how things go terribly wrong. The next episode of Morgoth, the Dark Lord. Bye, everybody.